Having received money from Jennifer, I pick up the steaks at the front door. However, there are only 3 wrapped steaks. While wondering why is that, I go to the dining room and say, "Jennifer, it seems like the count is off. There are only 3 wrapped steaks." Jennifer says, "There's no mistake. Did you intend for Nancy to eat even though she's less than a daughter-in-law? She's just standing there wearing an apron and not doing anything. What a presumptuous girl." A small "ew" slips out from me, which gets drowned out by John's voice saying, "Wow, this looks delicious." The story goes back to when we were newlyweds. My husband John and I, Nancy, were living happily and harmoniously every day. There was only one issue. John always wants to go back to his family home in the neighborhood every weekend. Until he got married, John had been living with Jennifer at his parents' home. The father-in-law had already passed away by the time John and I got married. If John had moved out of his parents' house after getting married and Jennifer was living alone, I could understand why he would go check on her every weekend. But Jennifer is not living alone now. That's because sister-in-law Linda is living with her. Linda was married, but she got divorced because she and her husband did not get along. She returned to her parents' home almost as soon as her husband moved out after getting married. Therefore, Jennifer is living with Linda. There is nothing to worry about. Moreover, Jennifer is quite a well-known person in the neighborhood. She is a manners instructor at a university, and the neighbors call her teacher, respecting her greatly. Therefore, her pride is high. When she tried to keep it a secret that Linda had returned home and told me, "Please don't tell anyone," I was rather turned off. However, the neighbors don't know this side of Jennifer. The neighbors all think of Jennifer as a calm and gentle manners teacher. Since Jennifer is so well known, there is no way she could feel lonely if left alone. If something were to happen, surely Linda or the neighbors would notice. At first, I didn't understand why John would want to go to his parents' house every weekend. However, once I got used to married life and things settled down, I thought it wouldn't be right to keep avoiding my in-laws forever, so for the first time since getting married, I decided to go with him. "If you insist, let's go visit Jennifer," I said. "Yay, thank you," John responded. I started to worry if John was too dependent on Jennifer, but bigger issues awaited me at my in-laws' home. The first thing that greeted me when I arrived was Jennifer's sarcastic comment, "You didn't even bring an apron?" I had thought I'd probably have to help out with something, but in my family we didn't have the habit of wearing aprons, so I hadn't brought one. "I'm sorry," I apologized. Jennifer, looking exasperated, handed me an apron and said, "I can't have you coming here thinking you're just a guest." I was in a rush to help out, but Jennifer wouldn't instruct me on what to do. As I wandered around the house, looking for something to help with, Jennifer tapped my shoulder and said, "Hey." It was quite a strong tap, and when I turned around, she yelled at me, "Even if this is your in-laws' house, looking around someone else's home is extremely rude." I completely shrank back and apologized, saying, I'm sorry." But Jennifer was not forgiving. "Stop wandering around and do something," she told me. I reached for the dishes that had piled up in the kitchen. Then she slapped the back of my hand and yelled, "I can't have your filth getting on our nice plates and glasses. Don't touch the dishes." Confused and flustered, I thought, then maybe I'll vacuum. I was again slapped on the back of my hand and scolded, "Are you saying our floors are dirty?" At this point, I had no idea what to do. Standing there dumbfounded, I was endlessly criticized by Jennifer. "What are you spacing out for? You're such a useless daughter-in-law." When I looked at John with a "help me" expression, he was just laughing uproariously at a comedy show with Linda, despite seeing how much I was being berated. In the end, my first visit to my in-laws concluded with unceasing harassment from Jennifer, leaving me so drained that I couldn't even eat dinner that night. Of course, I asked John, "Why didn't you help me when Jennifer was blaming me?" John nonchalantly replied, "Mom just wants to give you a hard time for now. It's a phase newlyweds go through. It will pass soon," showing no intention to help. Despite this, John still wanted to visit his parents' home. Since I didn't want to see Jennifer anymore, I said, "Just go by yourself." John said, "All right," and happily started going back to his parents' home alone on weekends. Although I was amazed by John's dependence on his parents, it wasn't a deal breaker for our marriage. After a few months of this, John told me, "You should visit our home at least once a month. Mom is concerned about you." Certainly, since I married John, Jennifer has become my family. I can't avoid her just because I find her difficult. So, I decided to gather my courage and go. John told me, "Mom is probably tired of harassing you by now." But that was a complete misunderstanding. This time, I took an apron, but Jennifer still wouldn't let me help with chores. Instead, she yelled, "Help out! You're not a guest!" And again, John didn't defend me, and he was engrossed in some movie with Linda. Regretting my decision to come, I heard Jennifer say, "Let's order steak for lunch." John and Linda were delighted by those words. John said that the steak restaurant Jennifer wanted to order from was quite upscale and delicious. While Jennifer was placing the order, I was looking forward to the steak as well. After a while, the doorbell rang. "At least go and receive the order. You're so thoughtless," I was told angrily by Jennifer as she handed me the money. I went to the front door and received the steaks. But there were only 3 packaged steaks. Wondering why is that, I went to the dining room and said, "Jennifer, it looks like the count is wrong. There are only 3 packaged steaks." Jennifer responded, "It's not a mistake. Were you planning to eat even though you're less than a wife to my son? You can't do anything. You're just standing there wearing an apron. How brazen." "Ew," was the soft utterance I made. But it was drowned out by John's exclamation, "Wow, this looks delicious." Despite there being only 3 packaged steaks, Linda and even John started eating without any consideration for me. As I felt a deep shock, as if being stabbed through the heart, Jennifer was looking at me with a smirking face and said, "Delicious, isn't it?" as she ate a slice of steak. For the first time, I knew the sadness of being unable to eat while everyone else was eating. On top of that, my stomach growled loudly, causing Linda to burst into laughter. "Oh, poor Nancy! But if you are less than John's wife, it can't be helped," Linda said. She continued to pity me. "How sad, unable to eat such a delicious steak. How sad to be so useless as John's wife." I felt utterly miserable. Once the 3 of them had finished their steaks, Jennifer then told me, "Now go deliver the key that the delivery person dropped." Apparently, it's a long holiday, and the steak restaurant is very busy. They had asked if the dropped key could be delivered directly. I took the dropped key, got into the car and began to drive. I felt like crying from the sadness, but I held back my tears and focused on driving. I shouldn't go to my in-laws' house anymore, telling myself that it was as simple as that. I delivered the key that the delivery person had dropped to the steak restaurant. When I walked in, it seemed close to closing time, as there were hardly any customers. "Welcome," called out the cheerful Chef Richard, to whom I said, "Here, this is the dropped key," and I handed it over. Richard, who looked like a kind person, smiled and asked, "Did you enjoy the steak?" At that moment, I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to say it was delicious when I hadn't even eaten it. I opened my mouth to say something but couldn't. Sensing something was wrong, even Chef's wife Karen asked, "What's the matter?" As I tried to speak, tears started to flow and Richard said, "Just sit down there," prompting me to take a seat. Karen offered me a towel. Touched by the kindness of Richard and Karen, I said through my tears, "The truth is, I'm less than John's wife, so I couldn't eat the steak, I'm sorry." My desperate words seemed to surprise both Richard and Karen. Richard said, "You're Nancy, right? The wife of the teacher's son, John. I thought you, the teacher, and the John had eaten the steak." Upon hearing this, I first shared the news that Linda had moved back home. I also mentioned that Jennifer was embarrassed by Linda moving back and was trying to keep it a secret. "I'm sorry. I was actually told to keep this quiet. Please keep it a secret," I said, crying. Richard and Karen looked at each other and nodded. "It's okay, Nancy. Next time you go to your in-laws, order the steak again. Then I'll find a way to help you out." Richard had a stern look on his face, but he smiled gently and said, "Don't worry." For the first time, I felt like I had found an ally. Another week passed, and when the weekend arrived, John suggested, "Let's go to my parents' house." "Sure, Mommy's mean to you, but that's her way of showing affection," he said, trying to make sense of it. Given the promise I had with Richard, I decided to show up at my in-laws' house. There, Jennifer and Linda greeted me with smirks. Linda said, "Did you eat a big breakfast today? It would be embarrassing if your stomach growled again," and laughed. When I weakly replied, "I'm fine," Linda laughed at me as if mocking me. And Jennifer, again not allowing me to help with anything, kept scolding me, "Help out, do something!" My head started to hurt every time I visited my in-laws. Lost in thought, wondering if it was stress, Jennifer once again suggested, "Shall we order steak?" She must have gained confidence from the last incident. Glancing at me, she said, "Of course, for the three of us." And I returned a wry smile. Jennifer began to make a call to the steak restaurant, but her expression gradually darkened. She covered the phone and said, "The delivery person suddenly fell ill, so they can't deliver." However, John and Linda still wanted to eat steak, so it was decided to go to the restaurant. Wanting to hide Linda, Jennifer seemed troubled but eventually agreed to be seated in a private room on the second floor. Naturally, I was the one who had to drive. Linda was laid back, but Jennifer, pushing Linda's back, was adamant about not showing Linda to the neighbors, urging her, "Hurry, hurry!" Upon arriving at the steak restaurant, Jennifer told me, "Nancy, wait in the car," and left me there. John and Linda naturally got out of the car and headed into the steak restaurant. I sighed and started scrolling through my phone. Richard had said, "Leave it to me," but what exactly is he planning to do? While I was lost in thought, there was a knock on my car window. Startled, I looked over to see the panicked John, who said, Mommy's in danger! Can you come to the restaurant right now?" Jennifer is also quite old. Something might have happened, I thought, and hurriedly entered the steak restaurant. Inside the packed restaurant, Jennifer and Richard were arguing over the counter. "That's what I'm saying. I see no obligation to serve our steak to Jennifer, who keeps harassing Nancy." Richard, who was shouting, noticed me standing dumbfounded at the entrance of the restaurant and said, "Ah, Nancy, come on in." As I timidly approached the counter, Karen handed me a plate of steak. Huh? Why does only Nancy get steak and not us, her family? This is ridiculous. Mom is right. We went through the trouble of coming all the way to the restaurant. Jennifer and Linda created a racket. Richard, with his arms crossed, yelled back, "The fact that you came to the restaurant has nothing to do with it. You ate steak right in front of her, hurting Nancy's feelings. We have no steak for people with such character." As Richard spoke, some customers also started jeering. "That's right, how dare you say that after what you've done?" Jennifer and Linda left the restaurant with their faces red, leaving behind a bewildered John. I looked at the steak in front of me and asked Richard, "Is this okay?" "Of course," Richard replied. The steak I ate, after thanking him, was so delicious that it brought tears to my eyes. The encouragement from other customers as I ate my steak in tears was also heartwarming. Just as I was about to pay, I realized that I had left my bag in the car. It seemed that Jennifer and her group had taken the car and left. So I told Richard that I'd pay next time. Richard said, "Don't worry about the money," and even arranged a taxi for me to go home. I didn't know how to thank him enough, so I thanked Richard repeatedly. "If you ever need help, come anytime. I'll take care of Jennifer for you." His reassuring smile saved me. After that, I woke up, thanks to Richard's help. I lost all affection for John, who not only failed to help me when I was being harassed, but also left me at the steak restaurant. When I said I want a divorce and presented the divorce papers, John seemed genuinely clueless as to why this was happening. I blamed him for not helping me when Jennifer was harassing me, but John made excuses, saying, "Mom was just lonely because she thought she was losing me." I didn't want to hear such excuses anymore. After a heated argument, we decided to divorce. John moved out and returned to his beloved parents' home. From then on, taking Richard up on his offer of "come whenever you're in trouble," I started working at his steak restaurant. People said, "You're the one who was married to that teacher's son, right?" and told me what had happened to my former in-laws. Apparently, Jennifer had fought with Richard at the steak restaurant, gained a bad reputation, and was now ostracized by her neighbors. Even the existence of the returned John and Linda was exposed, and they seemed to be the talk of the town as, "Maybe something's wrong with that family." For the prideful Jennifer, this must be tough. John and Linda, who were whispered about whenever they walked outside, seemed to have stopped going out much. It felt somewhat relieving to think that Jennifer is probably taking diligent care of almost reclusive John and Linda. I have had enough of marriage. I'm working here to repay Richard's kindness, but eventually I plan to become a full-time employee somewhere and enjoy life on my own.